Our Plant Stories has been nominated as a finalist in the Independent Podcast Awards in a new category called Environment and Natural World. I'll let you know how we get on. Thanks to all those who are regular supporters of the podcast with their commitment to buying a monthly coffee. And to Anne, who also sent some caffeine my way this month, all of which goes towards paying for this podcast, the hosting platform and the editing programme. The link is in the show notes. And now, a plant story. Welcome to Our Plant Stories. Over past episodes, we have been digging into the stories that plants tell us about people and places, and we've travelled to several parts of the world. Today, we are heading to South Africa, to the home of perhaps the most ubiquitous of houseplants, the spider plant.
I'm really not sure how long I've been collecting them. There was a sort of fuzzy period, I think, where I was sort of getting more, and then it got out of control and became a collection.
A national plant collection, no less. We'll hear more later. I should perhaps confess that when I started researching this episode, I did have a spider plant. I've had it for years, perched on the top of the bookcase behind me. Let's just say it was a little unloved. If you also have a spider plant lurking in a corner, you might be joining me on a journey of discovery, because there's quite a lot to learn about this plant and to re-enthuse those of us who perhaps take them for granted. But to the story. Jane Perrone is a journalist who specialises in plants and gardens and has the Houseplant podcast On the Ledge. She's also recently written a book called Legends of the Leaf. I contacted her about spider plants, having read the introduction, but the plant gets a special mention.
So, spider plants. Can I confess that I've recently, in the last year, got a spider plant, but I haven't had a spider plant that I've owned for many years, funnily enough. But they were a very early plant in my houseplant career, dating back to primary school. Now, in the library, there were lots of spider plants, and they were all that stamp of spider plant that is just so totally uncared for. So they were yellowing. They were chlorotic. They'd not been fed or watered in quite some time. And I seem to remember that because it was a one-story building, I seem to remember there were windows, had windows in the roof. So I think there was quite a lot of light coming through. So they were quite, it would have been a great setting were it not for the fact that nobody watered them or cared for them at all. So these were dripping down over all these shelves of children's books. I mean, I was a massive, massive bookworm. And so I was just literally devouring stuff in this library, apart from the Dr. Seuss books, which I absolutely hated. Fortunately, got over that when I had children of my own. I now love them. But at the time, I would just be looking at these Dr. Seuss books thinking, what a waste of space. Back to the spider plants. So the spider plants were dripping all over the place. And I guess I don't remember this. I must have shown some interest or enthusiasm for them. And I was also a massive teacher's pet. I mean, I was the ultimate people pleaser child. And somehow, me and my friend Ruth ended up regularly getting out of class to go and water these spider plants. I don't know why we couldn't have done it during break or lunch. I really don't know why we were let out of class, and it probably hasn't done my math skills any good whatsoever. But I do remember tripping across there was a sort of central garden area, and then all the classrooms were kind of spread around it in a kind of a square. And I remember tripping across this garden, going to water these blooming spider plants with my friend Ruth. I don't have contact with that particular person now, but I do know somebody else who does. And I kind of feel like I should contact Ruth and say, do you remember this? Was this just my imagination, or did we get out of maths to water the spider plants? And so we would go out and water them. And I'm not sure we made a huge amount of difference to their overall health. I remember there was quite a lot of spilt water. I mean, it wasn't great around all these books, but we had fun doing it. And it was my first my first commission as a houseplant carer. And but then as a result, or maybe not as a result, maybe just because I wasn't that excited, but I was more into the cacti, let's be fair. I went to the middle school, saw the greenhouse full of cacti and got all excited about those. But I didn't have a spider plant really on and off, but not for many, many years. And then I was given one last year on a trip to a houseplant nursery. where they had a huge glass house full of plants, including a lot of spider plants. And I saw a plain green spider plant. And they said, would you like a plant to take away? And I could have had any of these fancy plants, but I chose the green spider plant because I just thought, yeah, actually, I really like that. So I've got a green spider plant now. It hasn't produced any stolons yet. It's still a baby. So I'm repotting it regularly because they do love to be repotted regularly. But I'm very happy with it. But it's strange. I've offered up lots of advice on spider plants over the year. I've helped other people with their spider plants, but for many years I didn't have one myself. So I don't know whether that was my childhood experiences colouring my future, or just that I didn't, and when you're younger and you're moving around, I didn't stay anywhere long enough for a spider plant to get really massive as they do.
I also like the fact that they entrusted small children, because you were primary school children, with watering cans of water around all the bookcases and the books.
Yeah, but what you have to remember is, as a child, I was more grown up than I am now. I was one of those children that's preternaturally adult at about the age of about 5. And I'm not saying that necessarily in a good way, but I was my report always said at school, Jane is extremely sensible and mature. And so I was a trusted pair of hands, right? So I think that's why.
I love the fact that the spider plant also gets a special mention in the introduction to your book, Legends of the Leaf. So it has got a place in your heart, even if you haven't obviously ever gone on to grow many of them.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And, plants can have a special place in your heart without them being something that you grow regularly. But I do find myself, since writing the book, really looking at people's spider plants when I see them and really enjoying the detail of them. I have to say, though, I still can't remember, unless I actually look at the book, the difference between the two major types, Vittatum and Variegatum. I still have to look that up to check which one, whether it's the one with the green line down the centre that's Vittatum or whether that's Variegatum. I always have to look it up. I cannot get that in my brain. But there are some lovely spider plants out there, and it's just one of those plants that I think you're in it for the long game. You've got to think to yourself, okay, this plant is going to get massive. I've got a plan. I've got to have a big plant stand ready for this because that's how it looks best in that chandelier type form. And it always pains me when people say, oh yeah, I've just cut everything off my spider plant. No, that's really sad. It's meant to look like a chandelier. But since writing the book, one of the things that did change for me was knowing how it grows in the wild. It then makes you think, well, the way we grow it, on a plant stand in a hanging basket, it's not how the plant grows in the wild. Those runners are not meant to be dangling in space. They're meant to be seeking out new ground and colonizing in a clump. So it does give you a different perspective on it. But it's still a plant that I would highly recommend having. I was down at the auction house on Friday and I did see 2 really good plant stands. And I said to my husband, I could get that for the spider plant. He's like, it's not ready for that yet. It'll need an upgrade, but not yet. So I've hold off for the ultimate plant stand for my green spider plant.
Once I realised that this houseplant is a native of South Africa, I knew I needed to find someone there who could join our conversation. So I wrote to Kirstenbosch National Botanical Gardens, and they replied suggesting that I speak to Dr. Ernst van Jaarsveld, as he had described a few new species in the past and would be best placed to speak about the species and the genus as a whole. So I brought Jane and Ernst together to talk spider plants, which in South Africa are also known as hen and chicks.
So spider plants, they are very, very common in South Africa. And just incidentally as well, it was also the first plants that I started propagating. And it was my grandmother that stimulated me, always in a flat in Johannesburg, and repotting, planting, and various house plants. And as a boy, I enjoyed it so much to see how these plants are growing. But coming back to the spider plant, it's a very beautiful species. So I always on the lookout because I love indigenous plants, and especially those which are useful as horticultures that can grow indoors. So I've seen it from the Eastern Cape and right up to the Limpopo province, but always associated with a little bit shade. So it's always in shade. So if one looks, we've got about 6 or 7 biomes in South Africa, and it's mainly in the forest biome as well as the thickets of the Eastern Cape. But the plants don't always read our books. Wherever there's shade or a forest patch, they will grow. And so they become so popular. And and on the farm where I work, we have a very large shade garden. And it's one of the major species that on our steep embankments, it's clay embankments, and it's in shade of wild olive trees, African olives. And I, with all the students, will go around, and then we will just take all these little pups or the chickens, and we'll just push them in this time of the year when it's winter and it's wet into the side of that steep embankment, and they on their own time they root. Once they root, they rapidly grow, and they start marching down. So we usually establish them on the top end of the steep gullies where we don't like erosion, and the plant will walk down plantlet by plantlet and establish itself, and before you know, it transforms. It's a transformer as well, and that's why a plant like the hen and chickens or spider plant, if it comes to a country, for instance like Australia, who doesn't have all the natural enemies, and you also plant it in a spot, it will transform the landscape. It just grows very easily, and it will form dense colonies, almost like grass. And so that's what makes it so useful. But I've never heard of spider plant becoming problematic in other parts like Australia or New Zealand or parts of America where it's warm. But potentially it can be, because many of these plants we take around, and especially the spider plant, which is so easy, and these chicks, you just break them and they brittle, and they wherever they fall, they will just start growing. If they've got shade and moisture, they will grow.
Does that mean that because people see this plant as an outside plant, that nobody grows it as a house plant, or do people still have house plants of this species?
No. It's more grown as a house plant, in fact, in South Africa. So most people don't know it in habitat, but because I know the habitat well, and I do a lot of expeditions to search for plants, that I come across it always, and I always looking out for new forms. And at Mboiki, at the time in the Eastern Cape, I collected a lovely form, which I also named the cultivar Mboiki, and I wrote it up for Plants Africa. And it's our mouthpiece at Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens, where we write up many plants, but especially plants with ornamental appeal. But I'm always looking for nicer forms, or for instance, with broader leaves, or maybe shinier leaves. Or so one is always, as horticulturists, we always look at plants for beauty, and these spider plants are beautiful, and it's just in a pot. They don't get much diseases, and they're easy to grow. You can go on holiday, you can come back, it will still be fine because of the succulent roots it has. In fact, so many South African plants, and the reason I think they have it is because we're known in our country of having say a series of good rainy periods for a few years, and then we get drought again. And the droughts are more common than the high rainfall areas. So these plants are so well adapted, and it also tells our humans a good story in South Africa, that we mustn't take good rainfall years for granted. And that's why the plants have got their own little water tanks.
And do you find many variegated forms in the wild? Or
No,
I speak as somebody I'm probably unusual in that the spider plant I currently have is plain green, and that's probably not that common because everyone wants the variegated forms, but presumably they don't come up very often as sports in nature.
I've never seen variegated forms in nature, and it usually starts in cultivation, but it must originally come from the field. So someone must have seen it, grabbed it, and then and a variegated plant, if you compare it to the green one, is actually weaker because it's the chloroplast, the green parts, which are like the sun panels, which gives the plant the energy to photosynthesize. So the variegated form is actually a little bit weaker. But incidentally, just in the office which I work as well, just below, there's also a beautiful spider plant, the variegated one. And some of them, there's the two forms. The one is the variegation is the white is on the inside, and the other form, the white is on the outside. But they must have have independently mutated somewhere, and obviously the people who saw them just grabbed them. So when I'm in the field as well, I often look for not only that, but other plants for variegations as well. But to think that the first person who collected them was or documented them was Carl Thunberg from Sweden, and he went with he traveled with Francis Masson. And Frans Masson was sent by Joseph Banks with the first horticulturists to the Cape, and they travelled together. And Francis Masson collected the live plants, sent them back to Kew, whilst Thunberg just documented them. So I won't be surprised if it was also collected by Masson and sent to Kew at the time.
Yeah, it's one of those houseplants that is, it's been around for a long time, and we've been growing it for a really long time. I mean, I've seen spider plants that are getting blasted by sun, in a window, and they're still doing okay, and ones that are in the darkest shade, and they're still alive. And even if you don't repot them very often, and when I spoke to Sally before, I was urging her to repot her spider plant, and I actually repotted mine yesterday, and I was looking at those water tank roots you were talking about, and I was just wondering over that. But they can be just so adaptable. I think that is one of the keys compared to, as you say, other houseplants or other plant species rather, that really are specialists. They have a very specific requirement for a particular kind of soil, a particular biome, and that restricts the possibilities for houseplants. And I think that is what makes spider plants so special, along with those other stalwarts that we know and love.
Jane, what do we know about their journey to Europe and their spread as a houseplant?
Compared to some of the species in the book, which, I think the most recently discovered plant in the book came into cultivation in the 50s and 60s, but this has been around for a long time. And Goethe, the German poet, was a really big fan of spider plants. And that's why you sometimes still see them referred to as Goethe's plant. But I think they had quite a tortured taxonomic journey, the spider plant. I think they've been in at least 4 or 5 different genera over the years until they finally settled in Chlorophytum.
And family as well.
Exactly. They've moved around. Yeah. It was kind of quite torturous trying to sort of boil that down for the book without boring people to death about all these different sort of now outmoded genera and specific epithets for the species name. So I think they're one of those plants that has really stayed popular for a really long time. I think, though, we probably fell out of love with them a bit in the 90s and early 2000s, because I think I used a phrase in the book, the wallpaper of our lives. Like, spider plants are in a way so common that we sometimes just don't see them. Yeah. They are just there and we don't think anything of it, despite the fact they've got this amazing history. So I think we've kind of got a new generation of people now getting into houseplants, and they're not aroids. They're not the tremendously trendy houseplants that we are seeing on Instagram. However, there are lots of people who are rediscovering or discovering their amazing qualities. And I think a well-grown spider plant, one that's been really properly looked after and has been allowed to put forth a mass of stolons and is really become like a giant chandelier, is actually a wonderful thing. And I would say it rivals something else that you could have hanging or on a plant stand like a Boston fern, but is about 1 million times easier to grow than a Boston fern in most houseplant settings, unless you're living in, I don't know, the southern US, when a Boston fern is probably a lot easier. So I would put a shout out for the spider plant being a really good choice. And if you style it properly and look after it properly, it can be really, really stunning. I don't know what the future is. There's been a lot of new cultivars coming on the market in the last few years as well. It used to just be the 2 different forms of variegation, variegatum and vittatum. But now there's all these new cultivars coming on the market. There's one called Ocean that's really popular. And again, they're great because they are, as you've said, in the wild setting and as a houseplant, just so easy to be propagated. And, that's why, if you do end up with a spider plant, you're probably always sort of asking around if anyone wants one because you've got so lots of babies.
And also, it's a very opportunistic plant. And in habitat as well, when one of those inflorescences, the little pups, fall into a tree stem, it will grow epiphytically. Or a little crevice on a cliff. It's just extremely resilient. And as you said, if it is under trees and the tree falls and it's in the sun, it will also survive that. But coming back to why it is so common today, and what I've read in most of the books in the past is that it is the most commonly used houseplant. And because they spread, those little chicks, because someone comes to visit you, Jane, for instance, or Sally, and they see this beautiful plant, he says, have a pup. And they take it, and it's spread all over the world. And small wonder today. And because of that resilience and of the soil, so tolerant of different soils, and it grows often in very limited spaces, it just is a great survivor, as long as it doesn't get frost. And that's why houses are the absolute ultimate ideal place for the plant, because it gets cared by people as well, and you can go on holiday, and that's a wonderful thing. You don't need to say, please come into my flat and water my plants. And even if it wilts a little bit, you can see it looks a little bit sad, and you just give it water, and within a few hours it's starting to revive, and before you know, there it goes again.
I was just going to ask you, are there any kind of folk stories or medicinal uses, or
Yes.
that come from its native lands that you can tell us about? Because I'd be interested in that.
For instance, the Xhosa people from the Eastern Cape, and to protect the baby, they use it as a charm. And the mother will, every day, when she's pregnant, she will have a drink milk and dip the roots of the plant into the milk or into water, and drink the water. And she believes that will protect the mother and baby. So it's a lovely plant.
Remember, if you have a plant story you'd like me to investigate, then just email me, sally@ourplantstories.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I'd be very grateful if you could rate and review it on your podcast app, if that's how you're listening. If you listen via the website, I love to hear your feedback too in the comments section. I hope you are beginning to see the spider plant, or to give it its Latin name, Chlorophytum comosum, through fresh eyes. I'd like to report that I have repotted mine, and it is currently in a shady spot in the garden and already looking so much better. I've also bought a new one called Bonnie, which has curly leaves. There is always a how to grow it part of this podcast, and this week there are two experts who both hold national plant collections of spider plants, Mercy Morris and Sam Green.
I must admit, most of the initial ones I got were just, and there's no way around it, calling them babies, because everybody calls them babies. You could call them plantlets if you want, or propagulls, but everybody just calls them babies. Most people will just give you a spider plant baby. So you can get a lot of them in nurseries and garden centres. Most houseplant areas will have one.
Get them on the internet as well, can't you?
You can. There's quite a few more interesting ones on the internet.
So then normally you'd put them in some water and wait for the roots to grow, and then put them in some sort of potting media.
Yeah, and I mean with the baby, you can forget them for a year as long as you remember to fill their little glass of water up. They'll get their roots in a few weeks quite happily, or a couple of weeks possibly if it's nice and warm. But if you haven't got the time, then don't worry, they'll chill in their little glass of water quite happily.
When you come to pot them up, do they need to be, if you're going to a garden centre, there can be, houseplant soil, or you might just have some garden soil, or you might have some multi-purpose soil. I mean, what would you recommend? Do you put perlite in them? Do you add anything to it? Do you put grit?
I don't think they're that fussy, but if you got the chance, buy something without peat in it. Because it's not needed, and any growing media should do.
Yeah.
And I haven't tried it with garden soil, but it'd probably work. You'd do a bit more weeding.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that will be fine too.
They're basically pretty easygoing, is what we're saying here.
They're staggeringly easygoing. One thing I made the mistake of doing once was feeding mine using control release fertilizer in little balls, the Osmocote stuff. And I found that it got stuck between the leaves a lot, and it burns the leaves if it gets stuck. And you have to take it out with tweezers, which is time consuming. So if you're using that, mix it into the compost before. Don't just shove it on the top.
So, Mercy, would you wait till you see signs that it needs feeding before you feed it, or do you just feed it anyway, or do you just feed it when you remember, or when you're feeding something else, or
all of the above?
Do you put yours on every year, or just when they need it, or more than once a year, or a couple of years, or does it just depend?
The big ones I put on once a year, and they're about so big. Sorry, that's really not very helpful.
That's like 2 foot.
Yeah.
Was that 2 foot?
Yeah, probably the pot's about that.
Yeah.
2 foot.
Yeah,
that's quite big.
They are quite big. I mean, their roots are ridiculous, aren't they? I mean, these huge, great big white snaky roots they have.
Yeah, they're like they're like fingers. They're white, but they're about as long and as chunky as fingers. It's really strange, and that's sometimes that's one day we'd like to look at if they've got medicinal properties.
And in terms of aspect, where are they happiest in your house? Do they want a window with full sun? Do they want a bit of shade? I get a feeling if mine gets too much sun, then it starts to kind of bleach almost.
Well, it depends what they're used to.
I think probably you're right. I mean, they're quite tolerant of all conditions, really. I keep mine in a greenhouse, and because that's where there's space for them, and I think they're happy enough there, but they'd probably like it perhaps less sunny. but they're fine in there as well. It's just what they're used to. Need to be sort of frost free, really. They need watering, but they can suffer a bit without too many consequences.
Fat roots hold a lot of water, so they're not that bothered. I find I had mine out in the garden again because there's not enough room for all of them at home.
Oh yeah, they're nice in the summer in the garden, aren't they? They like it outside, really.
And they went through that really hot period. They weren't bothered because they acclimatised to the sunshine. They really weren't bothered by it. They thought, fine.
Have you ever planted them out in the garden?
Got a few out that have been out. They must have been out for just under a year now, and they are just coming back. They're not that big, but
so they died off.
Yeah,
in the
they
winter,
defoliated, but they all seem to be alive. Sorry, that's Alexa going again. Yeah, they all seem to be alive. I don't think any of them have died. So yeah,
okay.
I mean, they look nice in the flower beds as well. I was thinking actually the other thing about the light is that they change colour according to the light. So if some of the cultivars will be quite different colours if they're grown in really bright light than if they're grown in the shade. So I've got, hang on a minute, I won't show you it because it's an audio medium, but I've got a Hawaiian that I've had indoors for the winter, and it's almost plain green, whereas in the sun it will have quite bright white stripes and bits of lime green, and in the part shade it will be lime greeny, yellowy green. So yeah, they all look quite different in different lights.
Did either of you have encounters with spider plants at school?
I don't think I did. My mum would have had one though, because my mum was a houseplant grower. I think that's where I inherited it.
It wasn't at school, but I did have some on the... I think my grandmother must have given me them, and I kept them not for very long because they died. And I thought, she said how easy they were and gave me a little book about houseplants. And then they died, and I thought, I'm not very good at that. But that's because I didn't know that you had to repot them and, things like that. And I thought, right, that looks nice. And I thought that was it. That was the job. And then they died. And I wish I'd sort of known that you need to... Things grow, they change all the time. That's okay. Things die. That's also okay, and just keep going and try again and keep watering and just observe. And it's not, plant isn't static. It's growing all the time. So I had it in a really nice little terracotta pot. And that, obviously that was fine for a few weeks and then it wasn't. So yeah, I think I didn't know that at the time. But
I think that's so true, because all the breeders I speak to, that is exactly what they say, is that you learn through that. They've all lost plants along the way while they're learning. And it's almost like, it's a bit of a, have you killed that plant? But actually that's how you learn, is when things fail or you work out how to grow it differently. So every grower has said that, and that's what makes them go on to be better growers.
The best thing about killing a plant is that you get to do a post-mortem and work out what it is you've done. I've killed so many. And I've killed spider plants. Just, you forget them, or you do the wrong sort of care by accident. My favourite trick is overwatering something that's slightly out of my reach in the winter, and you just keep it topped up, and then at one point you pick up the pot and you realise that it's sloshing with rotten water, and that'll be why it's looking peaky then. Everybody does it. Everybody does it all the time. It's fine to kill things.
I just like the thought that you do post-mortems.
Yes. You have to. That's how you learn. It's a good post-mortem. Get it out of the pot. Get it onto the chopping board. See what's happened.
Thank you to Jane, Ernst, Mercy and Sam for helping me to see my spider plant in a whole new light. I have learned so much in this first series of plant stories, and I think I will continue to learn through the offshoot episodes that will go out on the first Friday of every month. If you've missed an episode, they're all available on the podcast apps and the website of ourplantstories.com, and those episode pages are full of photos and advice from our experts. Our Plant Stories is presented and produced by me, Sally Flatman. Thank you for listening. If you want to show your support for this podcast via Buy Me a Coffee, then the link is in the show notes or on the website ourplantstories.com. I promise you, your virtual coffee will go towards the podcast, not plants.